Hello, folks. This is Bela. Our regular listeners and viewers will know that we've been doing an extended series of episodes that chronicle the trip that Mike Malakoff and I made in moving his boat from Brunswick, Georgia to Burlington, Vermont. And this was took us almost 30 days to do that. And we made almost one episode every day. Actually made a total of 23 recordings that I have been slowly processing and editing and putting up and posting to our channel. And I've been doing about one a week. Well, 23 episodes doing one a week, that's like 23 weeks. It's like half a year. And in the meantime, there's been a couple of other interviews that we've done with some guests. And so what we decided to do was keep doing the Brunswick, Georgia to Burlington, Vermont trip, releasing those episodes one a week. But when I get a new episode with a new guest that I'm recording in the meantime, I'm going to interlace those or introduce them also on an alternate day, but sort of in between the Mike Malakoff episodes. So some weeks you're going to end up seeing two episodes come out. And hopefully once we get through all of the Brunswick, Georgia to Burlington, Vermont episodes, we will get then back to our regular format of episodes where Mike Wasserman and I interview people, we make some commentary, and that's sort of our regular format. But I was fortunate enough to go on this trip with Mike Malakoff, and I thought it'd be important to chronicle those into some pretty good episodes. So hope this is one of those interlaced episodes with a quote-unquote regular guest. Hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musitz.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Today's guest on the podcast is Mark Dalton. This is part 2 of Mike's conversation with Mark. It was a great conversation, and they initially met in a pub in Ireland, and they had such a great time. Mike invited them to be on the podcast.
And since Bela was on the boat with the other Mike while we were doing this, I did the interview. So again, you heard this if you listened last time. Sorry, my interviewing skills aren't quite as sharp as Bela's, but I had a great time, and I hope you enjoy this second part of my interview with Mark Dalton, who joined us from Dublin, Ireland.
So let's get right into the conversation with Mark.
Okay, listeners, we're here with part 2 of my conversation with Mark Dalton in Dublin, Ireland. So you want to go back and listen to the last version to get the beginning and the intro, because we're going to jump right into more sailing stories from the other side of the Atlantic. Those of you that were paying close attention know that Bela had joined us from out on the ocean off the coast of North Carolina, I think he said he was. And he's got to go get back to sailing. So this is just Mark and I for the rest of this episode. So Mark, in the first episode, listeners that kind of checked this out, they kind of heard your history with sailing. And we kind of ended up talking about your current boat and maybe some of the places you visited recently, some of the sailing trips you've been on. What were some of the more remarkable ones that you'd want to share with our listeners?
Okay, well, actually, so for those who didn't hear the first episode, we brought the boat from Holland, sailed across part of Holland, and then had to lower the mast and had traveled down the canals and rivers of France and Belgium. So as part of that, and I know you're a sailing rather than an inland waterways podcast, but as part of that, and actually it was through a compatriot of yours, we met a guy when we were about a week out of Paris. I lent him a hose pipe, and he said to us, he had a nice big boat. I mean, mine's 60 feet long, and his was half again as long and half again as wide as well. And
wow.
he had a bath on board.
Wow.
Yeah. So when we were saying goodbye, he handed me his business card, and he said, come and see us in Paris. You can tie up beside us if you want. And I thought nothing much of it. Well, I said thanks very much, and thought, well, he's probably somewhere in the suburbs of Paris or something, that he's in a marina there or whatever, and didn't really think much of it. And then a few days later, my partner and I, we took our daughter to the Eiffel Tower, and we came down from the Eiffel Tower, and we were having coffee, and I put this guy's address that he'd given me into Google Maps, and it was 1 minute's walk away.
Wow.
And I said, we're taking him up on his offer. So we ended up tied up alongside this beautiful boat right underneath the Eiffel Tower. And
amazing.
Yeah, and coming in through Paris, past Notre Dame, and then particularly actually leaving Paris early in the morning. We left very early one morning when the city was just coming alive and the mist was just coming up off the water as we went past Notre Dame. This was before Notre Dame burnt, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of those lifetime experiences where you go, do you know what? I'm a really lucky person. This is just great.
Yeah.
So that was one very memorable experience. What was also memorable actually was, and I can't remember the name now of the inland sea in Holland that we sailed her on initially, because we picked her up literally from the end of somebody's garden to head home to Ireland as we planned at the time. And we'd head off down a canal with the mast down. No, with the mast up. We picked her up and the mast was up, and that there was a bridge, but they lifted the bridge for us. And then suddenly we were out on this inland sea in Holland, and we were looking at each other, just me and my mate Ian, and his wife was with us, and kind of going, well, we could sail it. We could put all that canvas up. That's a bit scary. There was a bit of a breeze blowing, but then we decided we would do it. I mean, and suddenly feeling this 60-foot long steel boat, turning the engine off and feeling this thing sail, which is what they were built to do, and sailing her all afternoon across this, and they are literally inland seas. They're large, and even some of the rivers are so big you can sail in them as well. That was wonderful.
Beautiful.
That was absolutely wonderful. And then when we got to the south of France, and which, as I say, took a good number of years, then taking her out into the open sea, and I'm trying to remember the name of the town. I can't remember the name of the town we came out through, but it had a lifting bridge. And so obviously with the mast up at this stage, ready to put the sails up the minute we got out to sea. And it had a lifting bridge that you had to come downstream to and time it absolutely perfectly. And as you know, as I keep saying, but this boat is 60 feet long, and if there's any sort of wind blowing and you don't have a decent amount of steerage, it starts going sideways on you.
Mm-hmm.
And this very narrow channel between a lot of very valuable boats, and the bridge still down, and then the bridge lifts, and then there's trawlers coming in, and you have to avoid them. Yeah, and
this is stressful.
You have no idea. You have no idea how stressful. And then taking her out into the med, and putting up the sails and feeling her sail again. That absolutely wonderful. And on that occasion, on a beautiful summer's day. And then I guess the next memorable thing was, as I mentioned in the last episode, was sailing her along the coast. So we went out through that same bridge then the following day or a few days later, and sailed her along the coast to come in at a town called Seth, and with just two of us on board, getting hit by this thunderstorm out of the blue, when we still, it was so quick that from seeing a small dark cloud appear in the sky and watching it grow a bit bigger and then a bit bigger, and then saying to each other, maybe we better take the sails down. From that moment to the thing hitting us was about 4 or 5 minutes. It was
wow.
It was staggeringly quick. The sort of thing you certainly would never get in Irish waters. I mean, you get a bit of a warning. This thing just came out of nowhere, and getting hit, thunder and lightning around us, and hailstorms. And this is in the middle of summer. Yeah. Hailstones beating us. As far as I remember, hailstones, certainly incredibly heavy, painful rain.
Yeah.
And then it was gone about 15 minutes, maybe half an hour later. It was gone, completely gone. And the sun came out again.
Wow.
Yeah. So so that was pretty memorable. And then when we got into Seth, it was there's a very extensive marina in there. And again, they were wanting us to take the boat in, and you know the way it is with marinas, where you've got to go in and turn one way and then the other.
It's a little hard with your boat.
It is hard, and I'm reasonably good at it by now. But on a day with any sort of breeze, it's hard. And they wanted me to take it in through millions of euros worth of boats.
Of these yachts. Yeah.
And so we didn't do that, and we got sent to the commercial harbor, and we ended up tying up in front of this beautiful Dutch training vessel, square rigged, one of the classic.
Wow, one of the old,
yeah. And the first mate came down to us, because I was mentioning to you in the last episode that people race
these things.
Yeah, and he raced them, and he saw us coming in and tying up.
Oh wow!
Down, yeah. And we were waiting for the invitation to dinner, but it
that would have been cool. Yeah.
It never came. Yeah.
Well, if he's listening, right?
He was a nice guy. He was a good guy.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So this to me is really fascinating. So what's in terms of the cultural differences, let's say in France and in Ireland, do the sailors treat each other differently when you're tied up? Is there a cultural difference? I mean, there's obviously a language difference. And in my, US American living in Germany, spending a fair amount of time in Netherlands and France and a little bit in Ireland, that there's some pretty big cultural differences. Do you see these international cultural differences when you're sailing in these different countries, or is it pretty much all the same all around the world?
Not really. I have pretty good conversational French, and that always helps. And I probably shouldn't say this, but being Irish rather than English helps.
Makes a big difference. Yeah,
it does help. You know, and the French, if you can speak to them, in their language, I get on very well with the French. I don't see any big differences at all.
So kind. I mean, the sailing community, it just strikes me how kind and helpful people are, and nice, and the class differences don't matter so much. And right, same in Ireland, same in France.
Yeah, the reason I sound slightly hesitant is just when you mentioned class. I because it costs money to sail in Ireland. I mean, there would be a class differential there, and certainly the yacht clubs in Dunleary, which is where,
which I've seen.
Yeah. I mean,
money.
You see a lot of very nice cars parked outside them. Let me put it that way. So there's a class aspect to that. I mean, there are organizations like canals, which actually is a French organization, which are designed to bring sailing to all, which is great. But I mean, it is generally in Ireland, it would be a pastime for people who, you know, have
With
disposable income. Yeah,
Yeah.
being honest about it. Yeah, and I presume it's the same in France. I don't know, but
I think so. I mean, if you look in the south of France, where I've spent a little bit of time, right, it's very clearly the same.
Yeah.
And if you go again, you know, and again, if listeners haven't been to Paris, this is an amazing place to visit and to get on a boat and go through the Seine, through the city, even if it's on one of those stupid tourist ships, right? It's just amazing. The bridges you go under are amazing, and all these houseboats lined up on the sides. And right, some of them are like cheesy bars and things like this, but the boats you see are absolutely amazing. And there's people just living on them. And again, I think you have to have money to do that, but it's a fascinating experience to see. And just like Netherlands is the same way. You go and see these canals and people living in these canal boats. It's fascinating to see these differences.
The guy I mentioned to you, he was, as I said, he was an American, and he was a merchant banker. It turned out actually he had his own Wikipedia page because he had his own large merchant bank at that stage.
Wow.
But when he went to expand into Europe, he looked at buying an apartment in Paris and decided it was too expensive. And so he had this lovely boat and he had brought his kids up there.
Cool.
Yeah.
In the shadow of the Eiffel Tower.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, these are all places that I think hopefully our listeners that are primarily in the US, you can see. And I mean, some of the points you were making are actually really interesting to know about Europe. Is that, you know, in the US, if you go from like, you know, New York to Washington, DC, which is a reasonably short hop, you can go 3 or 4 countries away, you know, right, in Europe. So you can go and just take a short 2-hour flight from Dublin, and you can be in France or Netherlands or Germany pretty easily. And it's something that's kind of a fascinating thing, and the cultural differences are much different. The East Coast, northeast coast of the U.S. is different than the southeast coast for sure, but it's nothing compared to the differences between, you know, waking up in the morning in Dublin and having lunch in Paris. You know, it's a big difference.
Absolutely. Or even just within mainland Europe, getting on a train and, you know, a couple of hours less, maybe, different language, different food, different everything. Yeah, it is. I lived in, as I think I said to you already, in New Zealand and particularly Australia for a good while, and I loved it there. But one of the things I missed was that cultural mishmash you're talking about, and having it all on your doorstep.
Yeah, because Australia is a huge country, and New Zealand, beautiful, but they're islands. And at least on your island, which is an absolutely beautiful island, you are a short hop away from other places. But when you're on the island of in the islands of the South and the North Island in New Zealand, or you're on Australia, you're a long way from anything else. You know,
you sure are.
It's a long flight.
Yeah,
but this is cool. What have been some of your favorite places to sail in Europe?
Well, other than France, which I've described, in Ireland, done a tiny bit of sailing in the UK, but mostly in Ireland, mostly local. Yeah.
And you know, I think, you know, in Dublin at least, you don't need any more tourists, right? But for the American viewers, and hopefully everybody gets a chance to visit Dublin or visit Ireland at some point in their lives, because it's a really amazing place. What are some suggestions that you can make for coming to visit in Ireland and maybe experiencing a little bit of sailing? Are there some places that you recommend, or some things to do?
Oh, sure. Well, one of the things about being an island, and particularly about being a small island, is we have a lot of coastline. So, and you know, one of the things that a lot of people here do is sail around Ireland, and there is a round Ireland race that takes place every year. I haven't done it. I have friends who've done it. I have a small boat here, and when I get time, I think it's going to be possible to take it cautiously around Ireland. So that's kind of part of the long-term plan. In terms of places to go, well, Dunleary, which is where I sail out of, particularly, more scenic places. down Kinsale, which is near Cork, and then particularly West Cork. There's a lot of sailing in West Cork. There's a sailing week down in Cork called Cork Week. And I think if someone who sails goes there during Cork Week and they know how to sail, they'll get crewing on a boat. Yeah.
How cool would that be on vacation?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And you'll make friends for sure, because there are usually, if I'm accurate, piles of pints, as you said afterward, right? You go to the pub and you make friends,
Yeah. No, for sure. So I mean, and you can just take that all around the coastline. Not so much on the west coast, because it's sparsely populated. But Galway City. Have you heard of Galway hookers?
No, I've been to Galway, and I've seen hookers, but I don't know what Galway hookers are. So please enlighten me.
Well, a Galway hooker it's something different to what I think you're.
I would imagine so, Mark.
Yeah. They are beautiful old traditional sailing boats. They're kind of the Irish equivalent of what I got in Holland.
Okay.
And again, if anyone just Googles them, and they race them out of Galway.
Oh, this would be cool.
Yeah. So and then like going up that coast, certainly not a lot of big sailing clubs going up the west coast. And then if you come around again to the northeast, then obviously there's Belfast, and there'll be a lot of sailing ports around that coast again.
Yes. And just make sure our listeners know, so Belfast is in Northern Ireland, right? And so it's a different country for now. But that's where the Titanic, there's a great Titanic museum there. I think a lot of Americans are big fans of Titanic. So Belfast was where it was built and where it shoved off from. So there's a little bit of history there. And there's also some really great nautical museums, really up and down the coasts of Ireland, because sailing's been such a big part of the history of the country, that there's actually a lot of really good history and a lot of really nicely preserved boats, kind of in all the major cities that I've seen.
Yeah, there is. I've been to the Titanic exhibition. Did you say you'd been there?
I've been there. Yeah,
it's excellent. It's really good. And and actually in Dún Laoghaire, just down the road from me here, there's a lovely little maritime museum in an old church.
Yes.
So yeah, they're dotted here and there.
And Dún Laoghaire, I can highly recommend as a place to stay. When I come to Dublin to visit our mutual friend Mark, I stay at the Haddington House. I'm not getting any kind of referral list. They have a wonderful cocktail bar and a nice restaurant, and you literally can get a room overlooking the harbor and see the sailboats coming in and out, and walk across. Now I forget the name of the ice cream place, but you get the Teddy's. You get the Teddy's ice cream. Yeah. You walk out on this big, beautiful breakwall, and it's really magical when the weather's nice. Something that's a nice way. You can jump on the train and get to the city center in whatever 20 minutes, right?
Yeah, no, it's a nice part of the world, particularly if you like the sea. It's a good place to stay.
Yeah, and see lots of cool boats and neat stuff. Wonderful. What else should I ask you that I didn't ask you, Mark? Because I'm not the best at this. Bela is really the champion of this. But what should have I asked you that I didn't?
Well, I guess I mentioned when we were talking the first time about crewing for a friend of mine who owns a very old dinghy, a thing called a waterwag.
That's right. We should talk about this.
They're based out of Dún Laoghaire, and they are the oldest one design dinghy in the world. And the class is, I stand to be corrected on this, but I think the class is about 130 years old, because as far as I remember, the 125th anniversary was there about 4 or 5 years ago. His particular boat is, well, it had its 100th birthday again about 4 or 5 years ago. So I used to crew that for him a lot, and for about 4 or 5 years, and then his son came home from Canada, and I was promptly fired.
For good reason. It's okay, you know.
Summarily dismissed. Well,
Yeah.
you know, I couldn't really object.
No,
to
and
that.
as a man with your relationship with your father in sailing, this is understandable, right?
Completely. And what's really interesting is that since his son took over the helm and he took over crewing, and I've no longer part of the picture, they've been doing an awful lot better than beforehand. So I don't know.
Keeps one humble, right?
I say it's the change in helmsman. He claims it's the change in tactics from the crew. So I don't know about that one. But they are beautiful old timber boats. They're, I think, about 14 feet long, and they fly a spinnaker as well, a very simple spinnaker that you can still manage to get into horrendous knots and get and use as a fishing net instead of a sail. And they have a very large, well, what we would call a large fleet of boats. They generally get at least 30 out on a Wednesday night. Yeah.
That's
So
something to see.
You didn't ask me about that. So
no.
Yeah. Geez, Mike, I can't think of what else.
I don't know. Maybe this is good for now, but I think we want to do this again. I think there's more stories to tell and more questions to ask and more comparisons. You know, again, we really only have had mostly North Americans on the show, and a lot of them go over, right? They'll sail across. And we've had a few of that, but you're the first European sailor that we've had on the show. So I think it would be cool to maybe have a recurring kind of a visit and maybe talk some more about some things to do in Ireland or in France. I think, again, we could do a whole show, I think, on the Mediterranean and sailing there in the south of France, because that's a wonderfully interesting place, I think, both to visit and to sail. And we'll see what the feedback is from the listeners. But this has been really fun to kind of talk about things from the other side of the Atlantic and the view from there, and some of the amazing boats, and, you know, just the age, talking about boats that are 100 years old. I mean, we have some in the US, but it's not typical. And it is, you know, just walking up and down Dunleary and in other parts of Europe to see some of these really old boats is really amazing. And I know I've seen in France, both on the northern coast, the Atlantic coast, and down the south of France, they're just some beautifully maintained historic boats that are still under sail. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and it is owning something like that. It is just such a pleasure to think of the history. Actually, one thing I was going to mention that when we were talking the last time was and there's I should have mentioned this before. There's an American connection to my boat. The Dutch sailing barge, which it has sailed in the Hudson River.
Really? How did it get there?
Yeah, well, there you go. And you're thinking, how the hell did somebody get a boat that draws less than 2 feet and hasn't got a keel across the Atlantic Ocean? You know, so the story. This was before I owned it. So the story was that for the 200th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty, there was a big sail-by celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And they got old boats from all over the world as part of this sail-by. And as I mentioned in the first episode, the lovely old Dutchman that I bought it off, there's an association in Holland for people who own chowks. Okay. And they were asked to send, I think, about 20 boats over. And it was going to cost whatever it was going to cost. And he and his wife discussed it and decided they couldn't afford it. And a week before the whole thing was due to happen, or the boats were due to leave Holland, he got a phone call to say somebody dropped out and he could go for free.
Oh, wow.
So for free meant the boats were all loaded onto what must have been a very large, there was 20 of these. I have a photograph of it somewhere. 20 of these were loaded onto a cargo ship.
Wow.
And shipped over and then lowered off the side of this massive cargo ship, because he showed me a photograph of it being lowered down into the Hudson
River. Wow, in New York City. Amazing.
and then they did the sail by, and then I gather you can navigate your way up the Hudson for quite a bit.
You can?
Yep. And they did that, I think, for a couple of weeks, and
Beautiful.
then put it back on the cargo ship, and back it came to Holland.
That's amazing. And again, probably most of our listeners know this, but so the Hudson River flows from the Adirondacks down in through New York City, and you can sail up it past Albany. There's I had a friend that lived directly on the Hudson in Albany, New York, which is, I don't know, an hour and a half north or 2 hours north. And it's the state capital. And you can even go beyond that a little bit. But these big ships going, it gets pretty narrow, but it's deep. They dredge it. So you can sail really nicely for, I don't know, maybe 150 or 200 miles. I'm probably wrong, and the listener will correct me, but it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing once you get out of the city.
I think they spent at least a couple of weeks doing that before the boat had to go home.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Nice. That must have been something. They probably sailed right by my friend's house.
Oh, there you go.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Small world. And now the boat is in France.
Yeah.
This was fascinating. Maybe a whole other episode too on kind of buying, maintaining, like living with a historic boat, living with a boat that's old and it's got history. And I mean, I love the story about how, you connected with the Dutchman that owned it before. And this idea of you're not just buying a boat, you're buying a piece of history, right? And you're buying a piece of somebody's life. And it's wood and steel, but it's kind of living and breathing in its own way. And it's neat to think about boats this way, the history that they have.
Yeah, no. And it's something to respect,
Yep.
It's not just a material thing. It's a feeling as well.
Yeah. It's not something you enter into lightly, because I'm sure it's a lot more, like we were saying, a lot more maintenance and a lot more challenges. But if you value that, the payback, I'm sure, is well worth it.
Yeah, there's this great stuff called Dex D1, which replaces varnish.
Okay.
And you don't once you strip it back to timber and you put this stuff on, you have to keep topping it up, but you never have to sand anything again. And
beautiful.
that is one of the world's great inventions, as far as I'm concerned.
That's a good tip. I like it. They should win some sort of Nobel Prize or something for science for this.
Listen, talk about a labor saver. Yeah.
Love it. Well, Mark, this was fantastic. And I appreciate your time. And this was really fun for me to learn a little bit more about your history. And what I will do is, we always have these show notes, and there's a little bit about you, but I'll try to gather some of these links that you shared with me and some of the things that you've mentioned in the podcast to make it easy for our listeners to explore some of the history and the culture of European sailing. Because, it's all the Atlantic Ocean, and there's a lot of shared history, between the stories of your dad and the stories of your boat. There's a long, beautiful relationship between Ireland and the U.S., and hopefully we've done a little bit to build a bridge in the sailing world. So, Mark, thanks for joining me, and look forward to having you again.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mike. Good to talk to you.
All right. Yep. Bye-bye.
Hey, Mike. Cool interview. Again, just like part one, it was great. Part two was just as good, and I really enjoyed your conversation with him. What were some of the interesting nuggets that you took away from that conversation?
Well, just the idea of taking your boat and anchoring it beneath the Eiffel Tower is pretty cool. And that got Bela, you and I talking a little bit, because you were talking about your experiences with Mike Malikoff sailing the boat in some of the canals in the U.S. And unlike in the U.S., here in Germany and the Netherlands and France, the canals and the rivers are still used for a lot of freight traffic. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about that to give some context to the stories that Mark was telling, because if you've never been to Europe, this might sound a little strange to you, right? That there's all this working traffic and there's all these working canals that still crisscross the Europe and are still highly active for commercial traffic. So what do you think? Maybe start, Bela, describe a little bit what you experienced on your recent trip through some of the canals in the Northeast United States.
Sure. So people who've been listening to the 20 or so previous episodes to this one know that I've been on a trip from Brunswick, Georgia, all the way up to Lake Champlain, Vermont, on Mike Malikoff's boat. Mike Malikoff has been on this podcast several times. And so just got back as Mike Wasserman and I are recording this. I just got back from that trip like 2 days ago. So all of it's real fresh in my mind. And we spent a lot of that trip on canals or inland waterways. And there's a couple things that struck me. Number one, how critical at least these inland waterways used to be in shipping and moving goods in the United States, because it was the only way to ship and move goods. There were no roads, there were no trucks, there were no airplanes, there were boats. And that's why all these cities pop up along rivers and waterways. It sort of all makes sense if you think about it. But it's also interesting to see how coming from Georgia all the way up to Norfolk, Virginia, which was mostly on the intercoastal waterway, maybe every day or maybe every other day, we'd see one barge. So not a lot of commercial traffic at all. So it's all goes other ways. And on the Hudson River, we saw a little bit of traffic, commercial traffic. Again, maybe one, maybe two barges a day or tugboats. And once we got into the Erie Canal and the Champlain Canal, we saw no commercial traffic, no signs of any commercial waterway traffic. So anyway, I just think that's interesting. And your conversation with Mark, I never realized that there's so many canals around Europe. I just didn't think of it that way. And there's all sorts of canals, and it sounds like they're still very active. They're in good shape, and there's a lot of commercial traffic on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can give a couple of examples and maybe a little bit of rationale why they're still here. So, like, we have a canal that runs through our town of Münster. It's called the Dortmund-Ems Canal. And it runs between if you know anything about German geography and if you know any history from World War II, I live about an hour from the Ruhr Valley, R-U-H-R. And this is a river valley that's the industrial heart of Germany, where the steel companies were, and where a lot of the machinery and the machine tools and all the things that kind of, maybe that Germany has always exported. This machinery is the heart of this, is in the Ruhr Valley. There was a lot of pollution here in the old days, but it's cleaned up now. And this canal that runs by our house ran between the Ruhr Valley, and then it goes all the way to the North Sea, right? And from the North Sea, you can get out to the Atlantic Ocean. There's lots of canals that connect the Netherlands and Rotterdam. You might know that is a big port. There's lots of canals in Netherlands. Netherlands is mostly at or below sea level. But like this canal for us, it's about it's about 270 kilometers long, which I think is about 170 miles. And it has all kinds of traffic. Like every couple of minutes, there's a ship, and these are smaller size ships that are carrying any range of goods and services, containers, grain, coal, which was where a lot of this came from. There was a lot of coal exports from the Ruhr Valley a long time ago. Those have mostly stopped now as we switch to greener forms of energy, but the coal would ship on these barges all throughout Europe. All kinds of stuff, finished goods, raw materials, wood, you name it, ship on this, because we have lots of trains in Europe. People know this, but it's mostly for passenger trains. Okay?
Yeah.
At least in Germany. And so we don't have, these big long trains in the US, right, where there's 150 cars, right? The train infrastructure can't handle that in many parts of Western Europe. Some parts do, but not in Germany. So they have small things for kind of the end of the line, right? And we don't like too many big giant trucks on the roads. There's limitations on how many hours per day and per week that truck drivers can drive. And in fact, in Germany, most trucks are banned from the roads on Sundays. The truck drivers have to stay overnight in the rest areas. Okay. There's a few exceptions. Okay. But so there's only 6 travel days a week for truck traffic. Right.
Yeah.
So the barges on these canals that crisscross are still highly used for moving bulk goods around Europe.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as you were talking, and on the canals here, the barges go maybe 15, maybe 20 miles an hour. You just can't go much faster on a canal.
Mm-mm.
You know, the
The
ocean
waves
ships
right.
could go a little bit faster, but you just can't go much faster on a canal because a lot of them are not super straight, and you got corners to go around and stuff. But regardless, you know, if you're going, and the distances in the United States are immense.
Exactly.
I just
And they're
did
much
this
shorter
trip
here.
from Florida, or from Georgia, Brunswick, Georgia, up to Lake Champlain. It was like 1,200 miles. So if you can only go 15 miles an hour and you got to ship something several hundred miles, it's going to take you a long time. On the roads here, you can go 60 miles an hour in a truck. And the other interesting thing is coming up, the Hudson River was interesting. We were coming up the Hudson River, and on the east side of the river, you have passenger railroad tracks. That's where Amtrak runs up and down the river. On the west side of the river, you have the freight train tracks. And we would see every day several freight trains heading north or south. I was like, I can't believe how long that thing is. It's like a mile long. It would just drone on and on and on. But, you know, that's sort of how it works here. Part of that has to do with the large distances. And part of it has to do with, you know, strategically where we spent our money and where we spent public funds to build roads instead of building, you know, trains or maintaining the canals. But I just thought it was an interesting contrast between those two.
Yeah. I mean, and just to give you a sense of the history, I just did a little research for you. But there are canals. The first canal in the Netherlands, which I live about a half an hour from the Netherlands, for people who don't know where I'm at. The 100 AD was when the first canal was built in Utrecht that connected. The Roman Empire did it, right, to move goods and services and to move the military. So, I mean, we're talking canals still in use, some of them that are, you know, almost 2,000 years old. There's lots more that are still in use. The Ring Canal around Amsterdam, if you've ever been to Amsterdam, there's many, but there's main Ring one, was built in the 1600s.
Yeah.
Right. There's all kinds of canals, large ones that were built in 1300s, 1400s, 1500s. Right.
Yeah.
You
know, the
700-800 years old.
The other thing I was thinking about is, you know, the canals here, like I just said, were not very crowded. If we see one barge a day, it was a lot. We'd see other pleasure boats. And I can't envision being on a canal and going through locks and stuff when it's really crowded. It adds to it. For me, it adds to the stress level. Right. I mean, one of the great things about being out in the ocean is there's no one around. I don't have to worry about hitting anything. I just sort of enjoy it.
It's really stressful. And you got swimmers in the summer, right?
Yeah.
You've got kayaks and canoeists, and you've got these big boats. My wife she rows crew, and they row out in this canal too. It's the only really place to row. And they're competing with these pretty big shipping boats, and with small pleasure craft, and with swimmers, and with swans and water animals, right? It's like, it's wild, all in a pretty confined space.
Yeah, like when we came up, you know, past Manhattan and up, you know, the entrance to New York Harbor and up past Manhattan in the Hudson River, we came up on a Sunday. And I have been there in that same body of water like on a weekday. And so on Sunday, you know, all the ferry boats are not running. The helicopters carrying people back and forth are not running because it's Sunday. It was Sunday morning, actually. So it was relatively calm, but it was still sort of busy from my perspective. And when we went, the first day we went through the lower part of the Champlain Canal, we went through the first 5 locks. There was a total of 6 boats. Sailboats. I think it was 3 sailboats and 3 power boats. So there was 6 of us in the lock every time we go into one, and you couldn't have put 7 boats in there. So we were full, and man, that was stressful because you're worried about your boat, and you know these locks, when they fill them up, get a little turbulent. You get bounced around, and one time, a couple on one boat lost control of their boat, and the boat went sideways in the canal. And that was really stressful. Or not in the canal, in the lock, I should say.
In the lock, yeah.
Yeah. And the second day we did it was a real rainy day. And I think everyone else stayed at home, but we decided to keep moving. So we went through like 7 locks that second day. It was just us. We were the only boat in the lock.
Right.
It was
That's not so stressful.
immensely less stressful. So I just, man, I give my European brethren a lot of credit for sort of their ability to deal with, and Mark's 60-foot boat out of steel, right? I mean, just pushing that around and navigating it and getting it through crowded spaces, man, that's like a whole nother level of skill that's required.
Yeah, no, for sure. There are about 30,000 miles of inland canals and rivers in Europe. And in the US, there's 25,000 miles.
Yeah.
Right. So the US is so much bigger landmass wise than Europe. Right. And we have more canals here in Europe. So it's just still really used, still really common. We have lots of locks because we have lots of elevation changes. And I don't have facts on, but my observation is there's lots of smaller locks, right? And there is, you see the boats go in and there might be room for 2 of these boats at a time, these shipping boats, right? That are, not ocean going size. And then maybe two or 3 pleasure boats, and that's it. And then otherwise you have to wait, and it's dicey. So yeah, all the things you talked about there are also going on here, but there's just lots more commercial traffic here. Yeah. And if you want to be geeky, I'm sure lots of our listeners know this, but if you're interested in this, you can go, there's maps or there's apps that are like Ship Finder, where you can go on the web and it will show you any parts of the world in real time where the commercial ships are. And that's fascinating to take a look at. So if you're interested in this topic, go take a look and see in France, in Germany, in the US, and you can just scroll around the map and see what at any given time of day, how much traffic there actually is on these canals. It's a big part of it was a big part historically of the US, as you said, less so now. Mississippi River is the exception, right? Still lots of, if anybody's lived near there or traveled near there, it's still lots of barge and ship traffic there. But all over Europe, you see it like a spider web. These commercial ships are all using these canals for commercial purposes, for moving bulky goods around. But they're equally used by pleasure boats as well. Probably not to the extent that they are in the U.S. because of all the extra traffic. But it's an interesting comparison, and you can look in real time just using your cell phone. Sorry, I almost said your handy, which is what we call them in Germany, but just using your mobile phone, you can check this stuff out. Yeah. So yeah, and that's what was, if that makes sense, this explains what was going on in the podcast episode, that you can travel all through France, all through Netherlands, all through Germany, and this extensive web of canals that we just don't have in the U.S.
Yeah. It's a great way to travel. I will say that, having just finished this Georgia to Vermont trip, it's really a lot of fun. So I thought Mark was a great guest. I hope our listeners appreciate, it's not Mark, it's not about sailing the East Coast, but I think it was a worthwhile interview, and one that gives us a perspective of what things are like in other parts of the world. So thank you so much, Mike, for having a few pints with Mark and having a great conversation that we have been able to share with our listeners. So what do you think? Time to wrap this one up?
Absolutely. Listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode. We hope that you found the episode as insightful and interesting as we did. And if you didn't, sorry, we strayed a little bit from the theme, and, I'm not quite as good as Bela, but I hope it was interesting and fun nonetheless. If you have ideas for guests or ideas for episodes, we're always happy to hear those. Any kind of comments or feedback, our email address is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, hit that like button on your podcasting app. The more likes we get, it helps other people find us. We really appreciate that. So that's it for today's episode. Hope to see you out on the water soon. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. Take care.
And from over here in Münster, Germany, not too far from the Dortmund Enns Canal, we'll see everybody next time.